Hello and welcome to the March Hello and welcome to the March 3rd edition of the Bub Reports. This week, we look back at Grenadian law enforcement's response to the daring escape of 3 prisoners from the South St. George police station. Their response came in the form of a press conference last Monday in which they stopped short of accepting full responsibility for the glaring failure on their part to shield extremely dangerous criminals who went on to confess to the murder of Kathy Brandel and Ralph Hendry, owners of the SV Simplicity catamaran in neighboring St. Vincent.
Are you prepared to accept responsibility on behalf of the police force for the blunders of RGPF? Are you prepared to come to the public and accept responsibility?
As I said, that there is an investigation on the way, and upon the conclusion of the investigation, we will do what is appropriate.
In their 60s, the couple lived aboard their vessel and enjoyed a once-in-a-lifetime trip they had planned for 12 years before their untimely demise. The top brass of the Royal Grenada Police Force, including Assistant Commissioner of Police Vannie Kerwin and Commissioner of Police and Acting Top Cop Don Mackenzie, were peppered with questions about their agency's failure to keep these men at bay. We will also examine jurisdiction issues in this case and how it may play out during the trio's appearance in court on Monday, March 4th in neighboring St. Vincent. Preliminarily, the men have been charged with illegally entering St. Vincent and the Grenadines territory in a stolen marine vessel. Still, no charges have yet been laid for the alleged murder of the couple. We will also discuss why, even in the face of the most heinous crimes, citizens are still granted the option of bail. But first, we sit with a Canadian yachter who will reflect on Kathy and Ralph's lives as lovers of ocean life and how their deaths may impact yachties' perceptions of safety and security in Grenada and the Caribbean. We welcome our guests, Lynn Cack, experienced yachter and member of Grenada Hash House Harriers. Jomo Sanga Thomas, attorney at law and former House Speaker in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Lady Anande Trotman Joseph, attorney and member of the Grenada National Organization of Women. And Gary Griffith, former Commissioner of Police in Trinidad and Tobago. Here is our host, Dr. Kellon Bubb, with this week's editorial titled, Poor Policing Demands Full Accountability from the RGPF. I am Rion Charles. We thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. If you are joining us this week, please remember to like and share this live stream. Now, the tragic demise of an American sailing couple in Grenada marks the end of a series of failures by the State Protective Services to properly secure dangerous criminals. Escapes from the Grenville court, as well as the South St. George police station, have raised concerns among citizens about the ability of 4 violent criminals to escape lawful custody from facilities meant to shield them from the law-abiding citizens in the national community. Now, Acting Commissioner of Police Don McKenzie, in the very awkward police press conference last week, claims, for example, that the South St. George police station was highly secure.
That I personally visited the station immediately after the reported escape. And I am satisfied that if proper procedures were followed, that we should not have an escape. The arrangements in that location has sufficient safety to prevent an incident like that occurring.
The principal contradiction at last Monday's press conference was the top cop's assurance of facility and capacity security, while failing to identify the specific protocol breaches that led to this horrid escape. Now, rather than suspending all officers responsible for the station, the national community was informed that one was reassigned pending the investigation's outcome. Given the failure to protect civilians and to prevent the fatal death of 2 visitors, one might expect that all officers should have been suspended until a thorough investigation is completed. The question arises whether the police should handle the investigation, or if, in fact, an impartial body would be more suitable to conduct this inquiry. The commissioner also remarked, much to the chagrin of the citizenry, but in a way that he found funny, that cross-border search and rescue issues are above his pay grade.
So as a part of your own investigation, have you ascertained exactly where the alleged incident took place with the Americans?
You are speaking about issues kind of like way above my pay grade and my competence.
So, Mr. Commissioner of Police, we ask, if that is the case, why hasn't your boss, the Minister of National Security, said something, as did Dr. Ralph Gonzalez following the mass shooting that roiled St. Vincent and the Grenadines last year?
My dear fellow Vincentians, it is with a heavy heart that I speak to you and with you this morning from Morocco, where I'm on an official visit. I arrived last night in Morocco, and as I arrived, I heard of the terrible tragedy where 5 persons lost their lives in a shooting spree in Kingstown. I immediately got in touch with the Commissioner of Police, the Acting Prime Minister Montgomery Daniel, and also Camilo. During the night, into the hours of this morning, Morocco time. I was on the phone, getting updates and giving advice and suggestions. Indeed, yesterday from London, I spoke with the cabinet, even before this terrible shooting, about additional measures which we needed to take. And I also spoke to the Commissioner of Police. So we were putting additional measures in place. When this shooting came about, the first thing I want to do, of course, is to indicate to our people that we must be calm. We must not panic. We have to be resolute in fighting the criminals.
Some apologists of the current administration have dismissively opined that the Minister of National Security should refrain from commenting on any number of criminal cases under police investigation, since it may give the appearance of political interference. May I remind the government apologists, however, that their very own Tillman Thomas and the late Michael Dennis Lett MP, a man whom the current Prime Minister calls a great mentor of his, commented publicly on the tragic death of the late Oscar Bartholomew of blessed memory. In 2012, Thomas, who served then as Minister responsible for National Security and Lett as Minister responsible for Agriculture, Lett said this, quote, "I know the police will conduct their internal investigation, but they may also wish to consider setting up a broader commission of inquiry that includes a retired judge to speed up the investigation and uncover all the facts surrounding the incident," unquote. Then Prime Minister, the Honorable Tillman Thomas, said, quote, "As Prime Minister and Minister for National Security, I sympathize with the family and friends of Oscar Bartholomew, the victim of a tragedy in St. David on Boxing Day. Police Commissioner Willen Thompson has informed me that an investigation is underway to determine the facts. I have asked the Commissioner for a full report once the investigation is complete. I will give all the necessary support and make the resources available to ensure a full and transparent process. I have directed the respective government departments and agencies, including the Attorney General's chambers, to provide the support necessary for the full and unimpeded investigation of this occurrence," unquote. Therefore, the cases involving Bartholomew, as well as the murder of Jessica Lewis Colker on Lassagess Beach by a formerly convicted and violent rapist, and this latest case involving Hendry and Brandel, are not typical run-of-the-mill criminal offenses, such as the investigation of a manikou, but it all occurred under exceptionally tragic and high-profile circumstances, with two instances hitting Grenada where it hurts the most, and that is in respect to Grenada's tourism product. Notably, a government that relies heavily on social media as the basis for public communication has chosen to remain silent, not even using that platform to directly communicate with their constituents and with the national community. Within the last 2 weeks, it is fair to say that Grenada's reputation internationally has been defined primarily by international news reports on this tragedy. When the state allows press reports to determine a narrative, that narrative tends to stick over time. One only wonders if the government and their apologists would react differently if the roles were reversed, with Dr. Keith Mitchell and the NNP in government and the Honorable Deacon Mitchell and NDC as the opposition. This occurrence may have created an image problem for Grenada's reputation on the heels of its epic independence celebrations. It is crucial, therefore, to engage in damage control, to reassure citizens and visitors alike that Grenada remains a safe and peaceful destination in the Caribbean. The tragic events involving Kathy and Ralph are also isolated incidents and do not reflect the true spirit of Grenada. This does not take away, however, the pain and the anguish that their families are currently experiencing. The charismatic and well-loved Prime Minister, who oversees national security, is the most suitable person to address this issue, following the poorly stage-managed press conference that did the national security establishment no favors, especially with such a wide international audience. A leader must be seen not only in celebratory spotlights and galas, but also in moments of great crisis and angst, when a nation needs to hear from all of them. We do agree that the issue of crime is a whole of society issue, and one individual at the top of the national security establishment is certainly not the panacea for solving it. If Grenada is to maintain its reputation as one of peace and tranquility, it must tackle these issues from all fronts. And this has been our editorial. Stand by as we come back for our first guest of this week. Please remember to share this week's live stream. And viewers and listeners, welcome back to this week's edition of the Bub Report. We are happy that all of you can join us today. Now, before we proceed, we invite you to share this live stream so that more people can join in this week's conversation. And before we get to our panel segment of the week, I'm happy to be joined by our very first guest, who is, of course, a first-time visitor to the Bub Report. So we're happy that Lynn can join us this week. Of course, Lynn is a member of the local yachting community in Grenada, who will give us an updated reaction from the community on the ongoing developments with respect to the Kathy, Brandel, and Ralph Hendry tragedy. Lynn has been sailing the turquoise waters of the Caribbean Sea for many years and has made Grenada her adopted Caribbean home. Of course, Lynn, you come from Canada, so yes. I can only appreciate why you have a liking for the warm and beautiful waters of the Caribbean Sea. Welcome to the Bub Report.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And of course, you will articulate how yachters have been updating their safety and security protocols even before this latest tragedy. Now, here are some fun facts for our viewers and listeners. In 2006 rather, the website Caribbean Security Net recorded its first piracy event involving a yacht, which was classified as an attempted theft at that time between Grenada and Trinidad. In 2008 to mid-2009, 4 additional piracy attempts against yachts were reported in the same area. In December of 2009, the first successful piracy event in the passage was reported on Caribbean Security Net. And of course, in late 2015, piracy events began to reoccur, with 6 reported incidents occurring between December 2015 and March 2018. In mid-April of 2019, a piracy attempt was made by 8 men against a yacht transiting from Trinidad to Grenada, with shots fired at the crew and yacht, damaging the yacht. So it looks like the security situation and safety situation for yachters is evolving. Can you talk about those evolving dynamics within the waters?
Okay, so I'm going to be really honest and say that some of the stuff that the CSSN, as we refer to it in short form, some of the stuff that they bring up can be a little bit, they might be a little bit over the top on some of the descriptions, because there's people who saying, oh, it's an attempted piracy, when it's actually a fishing boat trying to scare them off of their nets. And so I will take some of what they say with a grain of salt.
However, a grain of salt. Okay, thank you for that. Yes, go ahead.
Very legitimate things, though, like the shots fired There was a history for a while between Grenada and Trinidad that there were concerns. A lot of the time, especially when Venezuela started going downhill, desperate people, desperate times. It's also, let's be honest, it's a drug route. So sometimes you may not have a great drug run. So you might decide, okay, maybe I can get something from this boat. These things do happen at times. And so one of the things that we recommend is you do what's called a float plan. So you tell people where you're going, how you're getting there. Trinidad Coast Guard has an excellent repeater system that if you have a good enough radio, you can actually hear it all the way up in Grenada. And so you can communicate with them quickly, they hear it, and they will send out help. And this has happened a few times as well, where they've actually come out and did an interdiction and actually helped out in a situation, in a couple of the situations. A lot of the yachties are aware of some of the history there, so they make sure that they go with a couple of other boats. One of the other things is that the pirates don't necessarily have some of the high-tech stuff because a lot of them are using pirogues and smaller boats. And so a lot of people do it at night, and they might turn off their lights so they're not as noticeable. So those are some of the things that happen. It's been an area that people have been aware of for a while, though. But it's honestly a lot worse before. Like the early 2000s, there was a lot of stuff happening. Trinidad was a lot harder with the cruising community as well. They've done a few things to clean it up. And so it's an evolving thing. When something happens, there's always a reaction. And people become more aware of it, and they do things to take care of themselves.
Absolutely. Now, what kind of communication have you been having with Ralph and Kathy's family, if any? Have they reached out? Have you reached out? I'm speaking now, when I say you, in respect of the entire yachting community.
The yachting community, I mean, those who knew them might have, depends how well they knew the family. I don't want to get into a lot of details because out of respect for the family, I have been in communication with the family directly because I've actually been helping out. But I prefer not to get into a whole lot of detail out of respect to the family. I'm not the
and respecting their privacy, of course, at this time.
But I have been in a great deal of contact with them, yes.
Okay, all right, very well. That is good to know. Now, again, how long have you been sailing, and what inspired you to move specifically to Grenada? Did you come to Grenada on a winter vacation and you just fell in love with the island and decided, you know what, I want to remain here for a while?
No, we actually came down on our boat. We left Toronto 2008 on our sailboat, my husband and I, and we jokingly said we're going to sail south till the butter melts. So we made our way down, took our time, and eventually ended up in Grenada in 2010. And between 2010 and 2018, we bounced up and down the Eastern Caribbean. We're not ocean travelers. It's not our interest. And so being on the boat was a great way to explore places. And we ended up settling on Grenada when we decided that we'd had enough of sailing, because for a number of reasons. One, it really is a safe place. Nature-wise, Mother Nature doesn't seem to dislike Grenada as far as the hurricanes, the bad weather, things like that. The infrastructure is pretty decent here. The government's stable. And honestly, you mentioned I'm a hasher. I made a lot of friends in hashing, and I've got friends here. And so it made it a very logical place for us to want to stay.
Now, in respect of safety following this particular incident, what conversations have you been having with local yachters in Grenada?
I've had some chats. Some of the long-term people. This is not an isolated incident. A number of years ago, the same thing was tried. That escaped prisoners got onto a boat, and this was in the Woburn area. And the person was actually smart enough to run the boat aground on a reef, so these guys couldn't go anywhere, and it failed terribly, thankfully. The couple are basically reliving a lot of this right now, so they're very nervous. So people who know of that and know them are a little more nervous because it's a thought of, yeah, we're sitting ducks, we're transportation. And that's some people. Other people are, it's like, yeah, you know, it's a one-off, not a common thing. I mean, and they point to the fact that, you know, criminals escape in North America. They can go on weeks-long shooting binges and stuff like that. There is never a guarantee anywhere. I mean, we still joke about the fact that probably the most dangerous thing a yachty can do is get on a bus here in Grenada, because the buses are just scary for some people. And I still believe that. And being in your dinghy is probably more dangerous than just being out in general. But that's not to say you can't take safety precautions. I mean, if you're just going to go, everything is great, things can happen. I mean, if you look around, houses have security bars. It's not paranoia, it's just a fact of life. You go to every island, every place, people have security bars. There's a reason for that. But a lot of yachties tend to think that, oh, I'm living life free and easy and I can do what I want. It's Jimmy Buffett's song. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. And they don't think of the fact that you have to take some responsibility for yourself. You're not going to cross a road without looking both sides, looking up and down the street. It's just like you can't live anywhere and just think, I can do what I want with no consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, you have to exercise vigilance even in the safest of places. You know,
what happened to me there? Nothing that was dangerous to me, but I still think Toronto's a very safe place. I was just darned unlucky.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you make a good point about safety protocols. And do you find that perhaps there is a disconnect between how perhaps more seasoned and veteran yachties view safety versus how much more younger yachties view and discuss issues of safety?
Yes, we get people who come down, they buy their boat down here, and I know I'm going to get crucified for these comments, but they come down and
welcome to the club. I get crucified all the time for comments I make public.
But no, there's a strong sense of their rights, but they don't always clue in that they have responsibilities. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of the times, it was funny when I saw, you know, Coast Guard here being reamed for not checking the anchorages and watching. It's like, that doesn't work. I'm sorry, we don't have police patrols through the roads here unless you're down in the SGU area and their security's doing it. And any half-smart criminal is going to keep an eye out for that blue flashing light. They do it up in St. Lucia when a huge rally comes in. And then once that's done, it's gone. But you can see where the boat is because it's got a blue flashing light. And so, yeah, I mean, you lock things up when you're in North America or Europe. So it makes complete sense that you have to do the same thing here. And, you know, do things like locking your doors and having a light on in the cockpit, because as one friend says down here, roaches don't like the light. It's like having a porch light on. You do that because it makes it really hard for somebody to do something if they're highly visible. And locking up. I mean, as much as people don't want to think about that concept of having to do things, I know some very old school cruisers who've been around for a very long time. And we met them back in 2008 before I first crossed into Bahamas. And they had stainless steel grates made to put into the big hatches, and that they could put into their cockpit companionway, all of these things. There was no way anybody was going to get into that boat uninvited. They also had a very yappy little dog. I'm not a big fan of dogs for security, because I also know situations where that has completely backfired on people thinking, oh, the dog will protect me. Yeah, friends of ours were boarded in Colombia. They're normally very vociferous Jack Russells cowered in the corner quietly, which surprised them. Didn't help them. If the dogs had a bark, they might have had a chance to do something. So I don't count on dogs as being your number one alarm system.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because in many parts of the Caribbean, we still think of dogs as one of our alarm systems. But what you're saying here...
How do you know? But seriously, some of these dogs bark all the flipping time. Okay, so a dinghy goes by, the dog barks. After a while, the neighbor's like, okay, I'm so fed up with you. They just ignore it after a while, or they move. And if your dog's barking every little thing, it's another thing if your dog will bark when somebody approaches your boat. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, dog barks at every flipping thing. It doesn't help either. Plus, I mean, I'm not a criminal, but I know that if I really wanted to get onto a boat that had a dog, oh, heck, I'd go at some point when I knew the owners weren't aboard, and I'd poison the damn dog, which is harsh. But if that's what I really wanted to do, I would do that. So, no, I don't. I mean, some dogs are okay, but a lot of them are not trained to be an alarm dog, shall we say. So I don't see it as being... Plus, traveling with the dog isn't that easy in the Caribbean. You've got hoops to jump through. Grenada is easy, but I spoke to one dog owner. She says it's cost her hundreds of dollars, And St. Lucia SVG, you have to email them ahead of time. You have to send them the forms. You have to see an official government vet. It's not always easy. It's not always practical. And so a lot of people start going, yeah, maybe this isn't such a great dog to just get a dog. Or when they do get a dog, they realize, oh, because it's a common question on the cruiser forums or on the Facebook groups, like, yeah, what do we have to do to get our dog into these places? Have fun.
So, yeah, absolutely. What I hear you saying here, therefore, is that, and of course, Margaret Francis, who is a regular viewer of this program, she, in respect of safety, she's saying common sense, that people still have to exercise some measure of discretion and common sense.
Common sense is not as common. You work in academia, you know that. Yeah. But it's sometimes people need, and it's very unfortunate that it took this to wake people up, but the discussions are coming up again. Discussions came up years ago when a cruising couple were violently attacked up in Union Island. 3 local kids, like the oldest was 15, boarded their boat with cutlasses, and she got cut. And anyway, they got back to Grenada. Grenada took good care of them, and response to even saying how, getting government response, Prime Minister Gonzalez from SVG was fantastic and actually had them up and had them visit him at his home as a guest for a while. So, and he actually implemented some changes because of that incident, because he realized there's things that we can do, especially because of Grenadines being a major cruising area. So he did make some changes in that regard as well. But it made people wake up to go, oh, and so there was basically a town hall at Port Louis Marina, and things came up, discussion came up as far as what can we do for security? What can we do to take care of ourselves? And one of the big comments came up was have a light on. And I'm not saying a motion detector light, because by that point, if they're on your boat, it's too late. You want a light on all the time so that it's like, yeah, something that's not as appealing. If you've got a boat that has what they call a sugar scoop, they're far easier to board. Those are the boats that if somebody wants to get on board, they can get on easier if they're swimming or anything like that. And so it's being aware of the fact that you need to make sure that if they get onto your boat, it's not easy for them to get into your boat. The older style boats don't have those. So that changes things a lot too. And so it's basically looking at your boat and going, all right, how would I get in? If I wanted to get into this boat, how would I get in? And then you take away that access. Because people talk about having weapons and stuff like that. And no, wasp spray is not a weapon. It does not work. You can look at the YouTube videos. And no, a flare gun is not a weapon either. I've proven that fact on my own, just shooting at a pillow and stuff, so that I didn't actually use it on somebody. But why get yourself in a position where you have to defend yourself? Mortify. If they can't get at you, they can't do anything. And I'm not saying that Ralph and Kathy were to blame on this one. I'm not victim blaming in any way. Looking at some of the stuff that I've heard, it's kind of a, yeah, there was other stuff happening as well. But there are things we can do ahead of time. Figure out how people can't get in. I mean, I'm sitting in a house here. I've got security grates on every entrance into this house, even the windows where you'd have to be Spider-Man to get into. Just, I mean, it came with the house. And so it's, as much as people don't want to have to start doing that and think, oh my God, I got to lock myself in. Well, if you live in an apartment in somewhere, you probably had, they probably had to buzz in to get into the apartment for security, things like that. And so it takes away from the fun, but yeah, so does getting killed. Or so does somebody getting into your boat, ransacking, stealing your passport, stealing your phone, which is the most common thing that happens. And I know a number of people have had this happen, that people have gotten onto the boat even when they're sleeping and they have stolen things. I had a friend down in Tobago who chased the guy off. He literally tackled the guy. The guy had a cutlass. He tackled the guy and then chased him off with a fishing spear. It happens in many places. And so it's just, take some responsibility. If you don't want to, then sometimes you have to deal with the consequences of not so pleasant things happening.
So what I hear you saying, that this particular incident certainly serves as a wake-up call for more accounting and more personal responsibility to occur. Now, we also have, well, you certainly do. Let me get two viewer questions. Do you think that the yacht should have an alarm system to alert other yachts in the area in cases such as this? And maybe they do, and what does that look like?
There actually is a system. And there's literally a red panic button. Unfortunately, it's not on one of the radios here, but there's a red panic button. And if your boat is registered, there's a number you get from your country. And it's called an MMSI number. And it identifies your radio with your vessel. And in an international database, they have all of the information. They know your boat. They know your name. They've got contact information. There's all kinds of stuff. It goes with what's called an EPIRB, which if something happens offshore, you can set that off and that's how they can find you as well. It is available. A lot of yachties are not leaving their radios on now. And so that's one of the things is that we've got every boat has a VHF radio. It's a marine radio. You can get on that radio and shout for help, but if nobody else is listening, it also doesn't help. And so there's two reasons why this is happening. One, everybody's gone to using things like WhatsApp and that to communicate, which is a lovely way of communicating person to person, but it won't get you help if you need help. You can push this red panic button and every boat within radio range, if it has its radio on, is going to get the alert. If you have it hooked up to a GPS, they will have your exact location. If you have it hooked up to your chart plotter, they can look on it. And so, I mean, any boater who's watching this, it's your VHF DSC. And it is available. But some of the modern radios, if you don't have it hooked up to a GPS, they'll beep it every like 3 or 4 hours. And people start getting fed up with that. And so they just turn the whole thing off. Some of the modern systems, you turn off your instruments, it turns off the radio as well. And people don't, they're so used to the cell phone technology. They look at the radios as being old school, but it's still very effective. And it's interesting because even listening to the communications in the yachting community, 10 years ago, everybody was on the radio, back and forth, and calling each other on the calling channel. Now, you hardly hear a peep on the radio. And so, but that's the first line of defense, and nobody uses it. The other thing too is like, okay, an actual alarm system. Yeah, they're not that hard to set up. We actually had one on our boat that had 2 loud alarm bells. One was right inside the companionway, right when you came into the boat, and there was one that was farther out that could be heard from other boats. Working with the security concept that people want to get away from the noise. So we had buttons in a couple of places in the boat. You hit that button, those bells would go off, we'd have a floodlight turn on, and our deck lights would turn on, lighting up the boat. So if you heard the bells, you'd kind of get a good idea of where it was coming from because of the lights as well. You couldn't turn it off with the button. You had to know where the fuse was to disconnect it and turn it back on. So it wasn't like somebody could say, turn it off. Like, go right ahead, you're welcome to try, but it's not going to happen. And so we looked at it as a way of being if they got past everything else and somehow got into our boat, or even just got onto the boat and we heard them, hit the button, get off my boat. We know you're there. And so that was part of the concept of that too. There's all kinds of high-tech stuff, but anybody who's been in a saltwater environment for a while realizes high-tech stuff doesn't always last long. So I prefer low-tech ideas of doing things.
Mm-hmm. Analog, shall we say? Now, let us switch gears and talk about an issue that's totally unrelated to safety and security, but an issue related to environmental protection and, shall we say, environmental regulation in respect of yachts. Last year, Hayden Redhead, who is a member of the True Blue community in the south of the island, who appeared on the Bub Report, he lobbed accusations straight into the lap of the yachting community and sailors moored in the True Blue Bay area. He essentially accuses the community of illegally dumping human waste into the bay, letting the local yacht services, instead of letting the local yacht services handle your waste. He further expressed concern, Lynn, that the excessive amount of algae in the bay is as a result of irresponsible disposal of sewer into the water from yachts. Now that I have you here, I'm not going to allow you to go without you addressing that issue.
Okay, no lie, boats will dump overboard. Small amounts, obviously, there's only so much that you can dump at a time. However, the disingenuous part of this is the fact that the raw waste from the True Blue area gets dumped into the very top of that bay by Budget Marine, the One Love Restaurant, Spice Island Marine. You've also got the drainage ditch that cleans out Care Brewery, Frequente, the Lime, a lot of that area, going towards Caliste a little bit, but basically Frequente and the Limes and Morris Bishop Highway, all of that, all of the drainage, all the gray water, everything goes right into the top of that bay. And so, and saying, oh, having the marine services deal with the waste. There's only one place you can get a pump out in Grenada when it's working, and that's Port Louis Marina. It's not available anywhere else. If somebody had a barge system that would go around and pump out boats, I know many people would happily avail themselves of it. But there is no service like that. It was tried at one point, didn't work. And so it's a combination of things. And so what the funny thing is too, okay, so this barge gets it. Where does it empty out? All right, it's probably going to have to go to somewhere like Port Louis. Well, barges don't do well in rough conditions. So you need somewhere where they can empty it out effectively. Problem is, Grenada doesn't treat its own waste anyway. Unless you've got a septic tank here, if you're down in the St. George's area and you're on the sewer system, it goes straight out off of Grand Anse Beach. And at one point, that pipe was broken. When you were flying in, you could see the plume. I knew divers who were hired to go and take a look at this, and they said, yeah, it's actually pretty close to the beach. And so the problem is that Grenada doesn't take care of its waste well either. I'm not shifting blame, but if there was some way that it could be done properly, it'd be great. But unfortunately, you've got hundreds of people's, like the apartments, everything else in the True Blue area, literally their waste is going straight into that top of that bay. And so I don't have an answer to that, except for the fact that I think the whole system needs to be looked at.
So it's more of a systemic issue. So essentially, what I hear you saying here is that there are issues with respect to waste treatment in Grenada. You then have issues in respect to the capacity, and what I also hear you saying too is that it's not necessarily only the yachties who might be complicit here.
And it's funny, I was actually on the True Blue WhatsApp group for a while, the residents group there when we were down on our boat there. And comments would come up. And it's just like people would say, oh, well, the yachties and the garbage in the water and that. It's like, well, hang on, guys. If you look at how many pot hounds are ripping up people's garbage because they can't put it into an acceptable bin, or people just trucking their stuff and it ends up in the water, well, now yachties are being blamed for that. And so just because it's in the water, it's not necessarily the boats that cause these problems. And so there's a lot of different things. It's, you know, making sure our garbage is in an acceptable container so it doesn't blow in the water if we're on land. If you're on a boat, yeah, make sure it doesn't blow overboard and don't toss your stuff overboard because it's absolutely horrible. And I know most yachties will not do that because they will try and find ways to throw out their garbage, especially in Prickly Bay. There's a few places they can bring it to a bin, not a problem, quite legally, and it's acceptable and it's welcome. And so it's easy to point fingers, but you also have to find solutions. And so yeah, you can blame these people, you can blame the yachts, but what is the solution? You need some way of either having boats go around and literally acting like a septic system and cleaning out their holding tanks, and then having an appropriate place to dump that, which is either going 3 miles offshore or having a way of getting it into the local sewer system. But the problem is if you dump it into the local sewer system somewhere in the Prickly Bay area, it's going to end up back in the bay anyway, in the same form, just maybe a little more churned up. And that's the concern. I mean, if you got a septic tank, yeah, great. You're not contributing to the problem if everything is set up well, but there isn't a good solution, at least not available right now. And so, yes, there's a concern, but it's not, you can't just blame the yachties.
Absolutely. Thanks. In the interest of balance, it's always important to articulate all sides of a story. There's always your side, my side, and the truth. It's
also interesting too, because in Woburn, so in Clark's Court Bay or Woburn Bay, depending on which name you know it by,
yes,
a lot of people say, oh, it's the yachties' fault that it stinks up here. No, guys, it's the distillery. I mean, Stinky Bridge, Stinky Knoll, Stinky Creek, that's all coming from the distillery. And that's why the top of that bay is pretty foul, because if you know how the water works, it goes out to the ocean. It doesn't come in from the yachties. And it's something that's been told to a number of people and they start believing it. And it's like, no, not necessarily. And so, you know, when they had to shut it down for various reasons at one point, all of a sudden, yeah, the bay was a lot cleaner. But that smell, you know, that smell, because if you go up by Rivers Rum and you go to their creek where it comes out, it's the exact same smell. And so it's easy to find a scapegoat when it doesn't have to affect you. And so it's you know, the combination of things.
Absolutely. Now, of course, thank you so much, Lynn, for appearing on this week's edition of the Bub Report. But before you go, I do know that you do hashing. Of course, one of my cousins, who he's a recent retiree, Esmond Bain. I'm calling you out here, brother. He's actually joined the hashing community. I think he had his, shall we say, initiation a couple of weeks ago. But he's retired back to Grenada, and he's very excited to be participating in hashing. So tell us about the hashing activities that goes on in Grenada, and how can perhaps people who want to retire, you know, Grenadians in the diaspora who are returning home and want things to do about hashing.
It's not even just the diaspora; it's great for everyone. Hashing is jokingly referred to as drinkers with a running problem. You do not have to be a drinker, and this is actually a very family-friendly group. And hashing is an international thing. Yes. So in Grenada, a hash group is referred to as a kennel. Grenada has one of the biggest kennels in the world. We've had some of the biggest hashes in the world, with over 500 people sometimes. Actually, this June, we're hosting the Inter-Caribbean Hash. And so there's going to be a week of really great activities that will be fun for both, you know, local hashers and any visiting hashers. But to get them, and so basically the hares, they're the people who set the trail. They set a trail. They go ahead of time, they look through the trails, find something, and then they mark it with paper so we can find it. We have to use paper because some places use flour. Unfortunately, goats and sheep will eat the flour. That's happened to me in karaoke, which was quite funny, actually. So we follow these blobs of paper. And there's usually a walker's trail, runner's trail, and then sometimes there's other variations in between. If you're reasonably fit, you should be able to do a walker's trail. It's an aggressive hike, basically. And then we come back and we have a wonderful time together. There's music, there's food. We get our beer for a decent price. And it's a fantastic way to network. Like I said, I made a lot of friends here. And so I say to even young people, you want to meet people, you want to network, you want to figure out, come hashing, because you'd be amazed at some of the people that end up hashing and go, wait, that's so-and-so from XYZ. And you're realizing that some of the people who are in positions of more power are hashers as well. Plus, we've got the guy who might be selling fruit down the road. It goes across the board. We've got students.
Very inclusive.
Very inclusive, and that's the beauty of it, actually. If you don't mind getting sweaty and having some fun and possibly getting muddy and wet and going through, you know, the occasional river or creek, it's a fantastic opportunity. We do this every week. If you're on Facebook, if you look for the Grenada Hash House Harriers, you can find the Facebook group and take a look. It's an open group anyway, so that makes it easy. You can also just do a quick Google for Grenada Hash, and the website will come up, and that will give you the information where the next hash is coming up. If you join the Facebook group, there's actually an event notification comes up. And so you will find out. It'll come to your mailbox kind of thing. And it's a really, really great way to see the island. I've seen more parts of this island than probably most Grenadians because of it. I've met some fantastic people. I've made some very good friends. And so yeah, if you want a little exercise, it's a really fun way to do it.
Absolutely. Lynn, thank you so much for appearing on the Bub Report this week. Of course, one of our viewers, she's saying authentic, and this is from Nelkel Joseph. She's saying authentic and honest, great interview. So thank you, Lynn, for making that viewer happy. And of course, I'm sure that other viewers also learned a lot from your contribution. Any final comments before we get to the next segment?
Offhand, no. Although I do have a list of things that, you know, if anybody really wants to do things. Oh, one of the things too, and it's going to be a funny thing, but a lot of people say, oh, you know, you got to watch out for the locals. It's not always the locals that are the thieves off of boats. A lot of times it's cruisers. I've actually seen it where I've seen a cruiser go onto a boat, steal something, and then take off, and I have all the evidence for it. And so it's not just, you know, worrying about this local fisherman who's out there trying to fish at night because it's a good time because it's a full moon. Be careful who you point the fingers at, because as far as I'm concerned, those little fishermen, they're also your first line of defense because they see what's happening. And so, you know, be diligent, but don't be paranoid. I think that's probably the best thing I can say. Don't be, you know, don't be suspicious of everybody. There's very few bad apples, and it doesn't matter where you are. Most people are actually good at heart, and hopefully you never need to worry about any of the precautions. But if you do end up needing those precautions, you can be glad you did it.
Absolutely. And this is a very important point you make here. There are nuances to these conversations that I believe we need to have in respect of just public safety and crime and things like that. And as you said, you know, don't go pointing fingers at the locals, you know, because all of the locals, again, some of those locals might be your first line of defense. So on that note, Lynn, thank you.
Everybody's worried about this one guy who's still running around, and it doesn't matter who you are. Yes. That's a shitty thing. Yeah, it was, and just, you know, with the 3 guys that escaped, yeah, that you said that really well in the beginning.
Now, Margaret Francis is asking, has there been an exodus of yachties from Grenada since this event?
No. It's funny because a lot of the people I spoke with, and I ran into charterers at the IGA too, and we were chatting, and they said, yeah, we're aware of it. Most people are fully aware that this was one of those rare occurrences. And that, okay, a little bit of diligence, but it's not worth being paranoid about. That it doesn't change the fact that statistically, Grenada is actually a safe place. Yeah, there's I look at the difference between safety and, I'll say, security in some ways. Safety, the odds of anything happening to you physically is quite low. Theft does occur sometimes. And we jokingly say that around Carnival and Christmas is when you really have to pay attention to stuff, because that's when some people might go, I need cash in a hurry. And that's when, but that's not just with the yachties. That's also everybody who lives here understands that too, that you don't make it easy for anybody. So, but most people are pretty good about it, and they've got their head on straight and are aware of the fact that this is not a common thing. But if it means that people are going to take more precautions, then, horrible as it sounds, at least something good came out of this, because you can't live in a bubble.
Absolutely. Lynn, thank you so very much. Again, I'm so happy that you were able to join us this week. And again, our condolences goes out to the family of Ralph and Kathy at this very difficult time. And may they rest in peace, and may their memory be a blessing. And of course, Lynn, I will certainly take you up on that invitation to have a beer and maybe to do a couple hashing activities the next time I visit Grenada.
We'd love to have you hash with us.
Absolutely.
Bring new shoes.
I will certainly make sure to bring new shoes. So thank you again. Thank you again, Lynn. Our viewers and listeners, Lynn Cack, who is a veteran sailor in the sailing community. She doesn't do as much sailing these days, but certainly has a wealth of experience, a wealth of lived experiences in respect of sailing activities in and around Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. And one of the important takeaways from this conversation is that we all need to be vigilant, but we also need not to be paranoid. And I believe that is such an important takeaway from this very important conversation. So what we want to do now, viewers and listeners, is that we are going to take a quick break and come back with the panel segment of the week. Please stand by. Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Bub Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.
Should your loved ones pass on, they deserve to be treated with dignity. And at S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, we can provide you with that service. We can take you every step of the way during your sorrowful moments. When that need arises, call S.A. Johnson Funeral Home at 347-777-9797. That's 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home is a Caribbean family-owned funeral home here in Brooklyn, providing funeral services, but in a dignified way. From cremation to burial to the repatriation of your loved ones, you don't have to go through the hassle, as we provide exceptional service that allows you to mourn and heal peacefully. For more information, visit our website, www.sajohnsonfuneral.org. Send us an email at sajfuneral@aol.com or call 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to this week's edition of the Bub Report. Please remember to like and share this live streams. And if you have not subscribed to the Bub Report's YouTube channel, please ensure that you subscribe so that you can be updated on our latest series of programming. Now, the Nationals suspected of being involved in the disappearance of the United States owners of a catamaran that had been anchored in Grenada 2 weeks ago, pleaded guilty to 4 immigration-related charges in neighboring St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mitchell, Robertson, and Stanislaus all pleaded guilty in a Kingstown court to charges that they entered the island by boat without a passport. They were also charged with entering the state other than that of a legal port of entry, or rather entered the state by boat and disembarked without the consent of an immigration officer in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and knowingly and willfully allowed themselves to be landed as prohibited immigrants. Now, the men were not charged with the murder or the disappearance of the sailing couple, though we were told last week by Assistant Commissioner Bailey of the Royal St. Vincent and the Grenadines Police Force that they confessed to committing a very gruesome crime. Now, the fallout from this very high-profile case has resulted in many questions being asked, which our esteemed panel will help us with answering on this week's program. We have assembled a team of regional law enforcement and legal experts to make sense of the legal and law enforcement questions that have emerged. I'm happy to be joined by Lady Anande Trotman-Joseph, attorney and women's rights advocate in Grenada, as well as Mr. Jomo Sanga-Thomas, former Speaker of the House of Assembly in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as a practicing attorney. Unfortunately, Mr. Gary Griffith, former Commissioner of Police of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, had to leave because he had a previously scheduled appointment that he had to take. So we do apologize for not having him here on the program, but he did commit to appearing and being here this week. Unfortunately, he was unable to be with us for this live stream this week. Certainly, we will be endeavoring to have a conversation with him or with other people in law enforcement as we continue to follow this developing story. Now, Lady Joseph and Comrade Jomo, welcome to this week's edition of the Bub Report.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bub. We are happy to be with you.
Absolutely. Jomo?
Hi, good morning. Good morning. It's always a pleasure to be on your program, my brother.
Absolutely. I know that over in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you all have a very high-profile summit. Of course, perhaps that's another feather in the cap for one of your former comrades, Dr. Ralph Gonzalez.
Well, clearly his mantelpiece is adding these. I don't know if it's silver or gold ware, but certainly he has another piece to place on the mantelpiece.
Absolutely. And of course, Mr. Thomas, I want to begin with you because, of course, you are on the ground in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And have you been following this particular case involving the 3 Grenadian nationals?
Well, I paid sufficient attention to make fairly informed responses to whatever questions you may ask.
Absolutely. No problem, sir. Now, in your experience as an attorney, now when matters of a cross-border criminal nature arises within the context of the OECS jurisdiction or within the wider Caribbean, where of course the common law is identical in many respects, and one is unable to ascertain in what jurisdiction a crime may have occurred, how have magistrates at the first point of adjudication dealt with that question? Now, are the suspects deported to their home jurisdictions to face protection, a trial, or do they face trial in the country in which they were apprehended by law enforcement? In your experience?
Well, you may remember when you interviewed Acting Commissioner Trevor Bailey last week.
Yes.
He said that there were certain admissions which are different from confessions. So these admissions, I think, would help us to get a feel for which nation would deal with the issue of trial of these men. For one thing, the basis upon which they are tried would be grounded in where the authorities find out or where they admitted these crimes were committed. If the crimes were committed in Grenada or in Grenadian waters, it stands to reason that there's no difficulty between Grenada and St. Vincent. There are all kinds of cooperations in OECS and in CARICOM, so they would easily be sent back. They entered St. Vincent illegally, and they have pled guilty for entering without inspection and so on and so forth, all of the regular charges that come with those kind of immigration violations. So one can expect that they may be sent back to Grenada to deal with everyone. Based on the admissions that Commissioner Bailey talked about, they clearly have a case to answer, and they may be returned to Grenada if it is established that the crime was committed in Grenada and Grenadian waters. Assume that it was the crimes were committed on the high seas, let's say. Then I think there would be no difficulty, because between Kingstown and between Kingstown and St. George's, they would decide which of them is best equipped to deal with the criminal trial, and I think in short order a decision will be made. I rather think that on its face, that more than likely they would be returned to Grenada.
Absolutely. Now, you said something here about admission versus confession. For those of us lay people who are not au fait with the law, what is the unique distinction there, Mr. Thomas?
Well, I may admit that I was on a yacht. That does not necessarily mean that I am confessing to a crime which may or may not have occurred on the yacht. To give a simple, practical example.
Very direct about that there. Now let me bring her back, Mrs. Joseph. Mrs. Joseph, welcome back to the Bub Report. It's good to have you again.
Thank you very much. And I know that we're discussing quite a serious matter that has affected Grenadians and people who live in Grenada to the extent of causing very much a lot of concern, national embarrassment, and lots of responses repeating for, in some cases, the call for the death penalty, and all kinds of responses are really coming up at this time.
Now, in the conversation that I was having with you, of course, in advance of today's program, there is a particular through line that was observed in not only this particular case, but if we were to follow other cases involving, shall we say, extremely dangerous elements in the society, one of the crosstabs involves rape. So, for example, in the murder of the American citizen on La Sagesse Beach, that was committed by someone who was initially convicted for rape before being released from the Richmond Hill prison. One of the gentlemen in this case was also credibly accused of being involved in rape. Is there a case to be made for stricter sentencing legislation to be brought before the Parliament in respect of how we address issues of gender-based violence committed against our women in the society?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Bob. As an attorney and as someone who is a social justice advocate, a women's rights advocate, I would have to say that the situation with the sentencing for rape is that we do have the laws. We have also seen more recently, especially in Grenada, more reporting of rape because of the support that is provided for victims, the advocacy coming both from the public and the private civil society groupings. That is the Ministry of Social Development, organizations such as GNOW, GNCRC, the Child Protection Authority, and so on. So persons know that if they have been raped, the system can work. And unfortunately, the response that we are seeing in terms of reporting is also translating into many court matters. As a matter of fact, our criminal assizes lists are sometimes in excess of 50% of the matters to be heard before the criminal courts and judges around sexual offenses. But I will say that based on my experience as an attorney and as an advocate, that there are sufficient laws. As a matter of fact, the laws around rape and sexual assault offenses are quite serious. So, for example, if someone is found guilty of rape, they may be subject to a term of imprisonment not exceeding 30 years. So that right away tells us that our legislators, our parliament, our people, our judiciary and judicial system, our legal sector and system are taking the incidence of rape very seriously. Now, of course, there are weightings that will be applied when the actual sentencing is taking place, because we also have sentencing guidelines. So long and short of it is the law is there. It is quite severe in terms of imprisonment if you are found guilty. What happens after that is perhaps what we can discuss a little more.
And that has to do with the sentencing guidelines. And Jomo, I want to bring you back into the conversation here around this issue of sentencing guidelines, because of course there is a range of possible sentences that a judge, a magistrate can dole out for people that are credibly accused of crimes. Of course, we know that we do have due process rights for people accused of criminal offenses in the Caribbean. Now, let us talk about, as a criminal defense attorney going before the court. Of course, a criminal defense attorney goes to bat for their clients, and so they do request lower sentences when certain offenses happen. But in the context of more violent criminal offenses, do you, in your experience, has it always been the case that judges don't necessarily dole out the maximum sentence? How does that work?
Well, I think that in St. Vincent, let me start by saying in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the maximum penalty for rape is life in prison. That's still on the books. With the sentencing guidelines, once you do all of the aggravating and mitigating circumstances and so on, the court may start at a particular point. Let's say it starts at 30 years as a starting point, because once you do the analysis based on the sentencing guideline, then you work the aggravating and mitigating circumstances, and you may come down to, or you may go up. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to come down. The other thing is that what you can, based now, the sentencing guidelines provide a certain amount of certainty in sentencing, and there's very little that an attorney, a defense attorney, can do, may do, to help to bring the sentence down, because there's no magic about it. He presents what he thinks are mitigating circumstances for his client, but in the end, it is the judge who makes a decision on what the judge, doing his own analysis based on the sentencing guidelines, come to the conclusion as to what is the appropriate sentence.
Right. Okay, and of course, and Margaret is asking this question, and you two esteemed people can answer. Just wondering, are the sentencing guidelines the same across the OECS, or does each island have its own set of guidelines?
The same across the OECS.
Yes, that is the case. We are one court, and this is what is very interesting. However, individually, sometimes the state may have different laws in place. So, for example, in Grenada, we're hearing 30 years. In St. Vincent, we're hearing life imprisonment. So that might be the only difference, but how the court would apply the sentence will follow the same sentencing guidelines.
Absolutely. Now, the other narrative that has emerged in this conversation has to do with the bail process, because, for example, in the case involving these three men, at least one of the men, as I said before, was credibly accused of rape, and then went on to receive bail. But then it would appear as if he violated the terms of that bail by committing another offense unrelated to what he was picked up for, which is why he was rearrested by the Royal Grenada Police Force in the first place. At what point does the court make a determination that, you know what, you violated the terms and condition of bail, I will send you up on remand to the remand block of whatever prison that they would send them to? Jomo, I will start with you on that question.
Well, look, most criminal offenses are bailable offenses. So, and even now in a number of jurisdictions across the region, even where you are charged for murder, you can come up for bail. I think in Guyana, in Trinidad, in Barbados, and a few other countries. I think in St. Lucia as well. In fact, just last week in our high court here, there was an issue having to do with a possible application for bail for a gentleman who was charged with murder. So most of them are bailable offenses. Where someone begins to commit multiple offenses, even when that person is on bail, it is the judge to decide. And more than likely, you would have the prosecution making the case that this person should not be released because he or she was released before, and that resulted in that person committing another crime. Where that application is made, the judge would make the assessment and come to the conclusion as to whether this person should be allowed bail. And normally when people are allowed bail, there are a lot of strict reporting conditions and so on. You can't be close to the person who may be making the accusation or his or her family. You have to report to the police 2-3 times per week. Depending on the age of the person, they may be placed on a curfew. So there are a whole host of things that can happen. The thing is that once somebody is placed on bail, that doesn't necessarily mean they're gonna accede to the bail conditions that the court set. And invariably, once you start disobeying the court, you're going to be remanded.
And so you ought to be sent straight to the prison and not going to the police station in that case. So, well, let's say go ahead.
You don't lose your due process rights simply because you're accused of a second offense. So that has to be adjudicated. If you are accused of one crime, you get bail. You are now accused of a second crime. the police don't simply take you to the jail. They take you to the court, and the court will make an assessment. Once it's a prima facie case that you are credibly charged, then the application may be made not to allow bail, and the court more often than not agrees that you should not be allowed bail because you're now becoming a menace on society, and you would be remanded.
Mr. Joseph, I'll bring you back here. Are there any perhaps limitations to the current bail process? Is there a need for bail reform? Is that something that we need, or do you panelists believe that the bail system that we currently have in place is a sufficient deterrent, shall we say, while that particular credibly accused, or of course everyone deserves the due process rights, but are there limitations in respect of the current bail process that we have?
In terms of our law and the constitutional rights of the accused, they, as my colleague Jomo shared, they do have a right to bail. However, I think based on what is happening here in Grenada, and I'm sure throughout the region, especially in the case of youth offenders, young people, and the kinds of crimes that are presenting themselves, which involve aggravated rape, aggravated assault, that perhaps our jurists, our magistrates need to take a closer look right at the point of granting bail to find out, and normally the prosecutor would provide information, but perhaps they need to do a little bit more of a review, find out about previous offenses, their living conditions, and so on, before granting such bail. So in other words, I'm thinking that the system needs to be a little more responsive, because now in serious offenses, in terms of granting bail, there may have to be more conditions placed on bail. For example, daily reporting to police stations and so on, and some forms of monitoring. Of course, sometimes there've been talk about electronic monitoring and so on, but these, of course, raise constitutional issues about right of freedom to movement and other balancing rights that accused may have. But in light of what is happening, I think we need to pay a little more attention to bail conditions until we get a better handle of what is happening here in terms of criminal behavior.
Jomo, is that something you agree with? Do you want to piggyback on adjusting to the
It's an interesting point, because I happen to be of the view that the bail in St. Vincent is rather onerous, and it's onerous particularly on people, the poorer class of people. That a man goes in and sometimes a very minor offense, and he's asked to pay $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 with a surety. And I've been to court many times where some of these accused persons cannot afford a surety, and then they end up going to prison and may spend more time on remand that they may have gotten had they gone straight to trial and get a sentence. But I take the point that the society is changing fast, and we need to respond to that reality as it unfolds. And if someone is, we have to look at the pattern and be very clear where this person is heading. And if we detect a situation where a person is a multiple offender, he's offending in a similar kind of way, we can't wait for that person to graduate into something really serious and gross. And consequently, there may be a need to have that person incarcerated, placed on remand until the matter comes up, rather than to release that person back into society and then be saddened by the emergence of something that is even more serious. So I am all for bail reform, although I come out of the Bruce Wright tradition. Bruce Wright was a New York judge, first Black New York judge. The Police Association in New York didn't like him at all. They used to call him Turn Him Loose Bruce, because Bruce Wright had the view that bail was a constitutional right, and consequently, many people would come before him if they have $100 in their pocket. You say, all right, $100 bail. You know, so
right.
I am for that tradition.
Now, and I want to throw this out, and I was having a conversation with my colleague in Grenada, Callistra Faria, on this question. Now, of course, last week, Commissioner Bailey indicated that the the three accused gentlemen gave statements in respect of their involvement in this matter, but they did not have the benefit of counsel present. Now, Calistro Faria was musing whether or not the actual testimony not taken before counsel, how does one treat with testimony not taken before the presence of an attorney as evidence in a criminal, in that upcoming criminal case? Lady Thomas, Joseph, sorry, I rechristened you there for a second. I'll start with you on that question.
Now, what is interesting is that we do not know all of the details. And I think at this point, we will have to have some confidence in the investigators, the police investigators, and they in turn would have to be guided by the respective director of public prosecutions of both jurisdictions. The impression we are getting, those of us who are following, especially from the legal side, is that there is high cooperation between the two OECS sister states as well as neighboring states. And these issues affecting one are obviously affecting the other, because even though we are looking at it symptomatically as to one isolated incident, for those who have been following what is happening between Grenada and St. Vincent and vice versa, our borders are porous. There are people here who live, for example, in Carriacou, who work in Union, which is in St. Vincent, and vice versa, and travel each day from St. Andrews, where I note that these particular three of young offenders are from. Yes. It is very easy to get access to St. Vincent and vice versa. So I am very sure, and I'm making that point because I am certain that there is close cooperation. And whatever we may be hearing now, whatever has happened, it has to be made right by those lead investigating officers on both sides, the cooperating authorities, the two police forces, as well as their legal guides, the persons who will be ultimately responsible. And as I said before, they would be the DPPs, Director of Public Prosecutions of the respective states. So I'm very certain that advanced conversations are presently taking place. And I'm certain too that given the amount of time now that is elapsing or passing, to speak more simply, and the fact that the persons, I read the report, the three accused were brought to court, certain details were about to be read, but they were sent back to remand. That tells me as an attorney that there are certain investigations and matters that are underway. And as my colleague Joma had said a little earlier, we would very likely see an outcome, most likely in the coming week, where they're either sentenced there in St. Vincent and held imprisoned on conviction or further remand, or there's a possibility that the magistrate there could deport them to Grenada for the trial of the more serious offense. But that is provided that there has been a determination as to where the crime did take place or did likely take place, because we're hearing Petite Martinique, which is the state of Grenada, one of the tri-islands state of the state.
But Attorney Joseph, of course, the caveat here is that parts, and this is just in jest, folks, okay? Parts of St. Vincent, parts of Petite Martinique, I'm sorry, the St. Vincent and the Grenadines nationals want to lay claim to it. Of course, that is a gunpoint. Gunpoint, I believe it's in Carriacou, not Petite Martinique. Right, Jomo, is that the case? You guys want to annex that part of the state of Grenada?
We actually want to annex all of it. I mean, the Spice Island is a beautiful place.
As you said, this is jest. And we take it vertically in the Spice Island.
Of course.
This wonderful Sunday morning.
Yes, absolutely. But the point, Jomo, here is as a criminal defense attorney, putting on the hat of a criminal defense attorney, a confession not taken before counsel, right, in the presence of counsel, how does that portend if, in fact, these gentlemen, again, right, as is their constitutional rights to retain counsel? Would
Right.
would the confession then have to be redone? Would counsel demand that another confession be taken? How does that work?
Well, let me first say, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we don't have legal aid. So you don't have an attorney as of right.
Okay.
So when somebody is accused, the police ask if they have an attorney. More than likely, a lot of times they say no. Then the police ask, would you want to stop for an attorney? Most times people don't have the wherewithal to get an attorney. So they say, no, I am prepared to go forward with the discussion to answer your questions. And then the police, and what has happened in recent times, we have an electronic interview, as Deputy Commissioner Bailey alluded to last week, in which he said these electronic interviews were done. So there's a certain amount of transparency. You can see what is taking place in the electronic interview. You can see that nobody is being struck, nobody is being threatened, and so on and so forth. The big question, as we have had to deal with over the years in terms of criminal defense, is what happens before the person enters that interview room. So there's a rather celebrated case. I think it's called Shabadine and the Attorney General of Jamaica, which says that a confession or a statement to the police has to be fair and voluntary. So that's the assessment that has to be made more often than not. And that case went all the way up to the Privy Council. So it has to be fair and voluntary. If there's a detection, suppose these men eventually retain an attorney and they make certain allegations which can be proven, then that attorney may make an application to have that admission that Deputy Commissioner Bailey spoke about thrown out. And the court may have to do what is called a voir dire, which is a trial within a trial, to see whether the confession, the admission, the statement was voluntary and was not coerced in any way. And once the court establishes that it was fair and voluntary, then the statements stay in. And they will be played at the trial, the eventual trial when it comes off. So that's the state of play.
We're learning so much. At least I'm learning so much as a layman here in respect of these issues. Now, of course, these men also had a previous matter before the court before this this unfortunate series of events occurred, and this brings me to issues of court backlog. We hear that sometimes, as you alluded to, Jomo, sometimes somebody goes to jail on bail. Not bail, sorry, but they go to jail on remand. Yes, on remand. I was trying to rhyme here, it didn't work. They go to jail on remand, but and so sometimes they wait for an extremely long time before those matters can be heard. We know that there is a serious issues of court backlogs in the context of Grenada, but is that also the case in Grenada and perhaps St. Vincent and Grenadines?
In St. Vincent, yes.
And is this an OECS-wide issue?
I think it is. Well, certainly in St. Vincent, and now I know from my colleagues in Grenada that it's also a problem in Grenada. It's a big problem in Trinidad. I mean, well, a bigger problem in Trinidad. You could be on remand for 8-10 years in Trinidad.
On remand for 8 to 10 years, you're saying? This is How do we address this lack of capacity issue in our court system? Mrs. Joseph, I'll start with you on that question.
Yes. So based on all that is being disclosed around this particular case that we are discussing this morning, I am beginning to see the need for a national response. I know many years ago I had been involved in a national criminal strategy for Grenada as to whether it is being updated or implemented. I don't think we have a good idea as to where we're at with that at the moment, but I think the time is right for us to consider a rebooting, a resetting of a national strategy that takes into account a whole of society approach. And I say that because sometimes we leave everything to our politicians and our government. And that tends to politicize issues, as quite frankly is happening now with what is taking place here with these three young men. However, I am thinking that we need to do a national audit, whether it is undertaken firstly by government, or if government wants to be more inclusive, they want a commission of inquiry, or they want a national committee to look at what are the symptoms that are being shared and bandied about. But really and truly, we're hearing terms even in your own editorial this morning about systemic, what amounts to failures and so on. So I think a national audit has to be undertaken to determine from a policy point of view whether it is that we need more capacity, both on the policing side, on the judicial side. And I know the answer is yes, because sometimes we've heard about the issue of bail. We know that we here in Grenada, we were down a judge, literally, a judge retired, and we did not have another judge to do the criminal work. So obviously, based on what my colleague Jomo is saying, I think we need to beef up on our capacity, provide more bodies into some of these jobs, be more holistic in our approach to looking at the social side of things as well, having general input from, as I said, a more whole of society set of input, so that we can really begin to tangibly deal with what is emerging in our small societies. Because obviously crime is picking up in a way that is now becoming beyond our capacity. We are seeing cross-border crime. We are seeing criminal gangs. We see here in this case that we're discussing 3 young men for the purposes of our sentencing guidelines. They are treated, 3 and above are treated as a criminal gang. They are moving. We've had a case where someone allegedly, an accused, has been charged for coming from Trinidad and executing somebody in Grenada. So things are going at lightning speed for a system that has been somewhat complacent because we have been terming ourselves as relatively safe. And I think the time has come. This is a wake-up call for us here in Grenada for sure.
That time has come for an evolution. Jomo, is that what you agree with? I mean, in the context of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you've been having those experiences in respect of things like gun-related crimes and so on for a long time before these issues have started to rear its ugly head in Grenada as well. How have St. Vincent and the Grenadines been dealing with that evolution, in your estimation?
Well, we have a real problem here. Last year we had 55 homicides, and the year before we had 42. So we had 13 homicides more last year than we had in the previous year. So it's a real problem. And I think that the points that my colleague made about cross-border activities, criminal gangs, all of those we see them here as well. I think the response in St. Vincent, unfortunately, has been a get tough approach. And I'm not saying there's no room for a get tough approach. I am a little skeptical that where the architecture is simply get tough, we may not be doing the kind of things that we ought to do. Last year, you may remember, I think it was last July, CARICOM had a summit, a crime summit, in which for the first time—
Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, in Trinidad, where they said they intended to look at a public health perspective to crime. I think that's where we need to go. And I'm not so sure, part of the rhetoric of the July summit in Trinidad, I don't see it coming forward now that we into this new year. We have to be holistic, as my colleague said. We have to look at all of the parameters to see how best we can address this, because there's a lot of political leaders don't want to express this view. They point to everything else under the sun, as they expressed so beautifully editorialized last July. They blame everything and everyone else but themselves. And I'm talking here about the politicians. But unless we have a social and economic policy that seeks to put people at the foundation of national development, I think that more and more we're going to have the kind of hopelessness, the kind of helplessness, the kind of alienation among our youth, and with the attendant difficulties that we are seeing. Once people lose hope, I mean, there's this idea that hope is the last thing to die, but when it dies, everything else is lost. So we have to ensure that our people, particularly young people and particularly young men, because that's where the difficulties seem to be had, that we have to find a way to bring them back into society, to bring them back into production. In St. Vincent, mostly women now are employed in all sectors, in the commercial sector in town, in government. It's mostly women, and a lot of men are not in the system in the same way. And that's kind of alienation is breeding, I think, the kind of difficulties. Plus, there are the cultural questions. You have people like 50 Cent, who are quite popular, who say, get rich quick or die trying. So a lot of people, a lot of young men are holding on to this.
Comrade, you're looking further afield to 50 Cent. We have our own Cayman Sixes in the Caribbean, who has that outsized popular culture influence among young men in particular as well. So
yes, indeed.
You have that as well. This is the same type of get rich.
Yes, we have the Vibe Cartel. We have the all of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Mr. Joseph, is that something you agree with in respect of the state of young men, and at the risk of sounding judgmental, because I don't like judging people. I don't like people judging me, even if they do. But we do see these pieces of anecdotal evidence in the context of Grenada, for example, where we see some young men, would be hanging out on the streets. Of course, last week we had the Member of Parliament for the town of St. George also making this point, young men just hanging out on the streets, consuming alcohol very early in the morning in some cases. And these are young men who are not even in their 30s. But, and so do you feel that, again, in respect of addressing these whole of society issues, that there has to be a specific case to be made for ameliorating or addressing some of the socioeconomic challenges that young men in the Caribbean confront?
Yes, Dr. Bob. And this is why I became a social justice or social rights advocate. Because if you go to the courts, I don't do that much criminal work anymore, but yes, if you have a social conscience, you work with people, you go to court, you hear even the stories of what is happening in our justice system. You have children of your own, they have friends, and sometimes you see their friends, or they may get entangled on a traffic stop or whatever. You have to pay attention, because what is happening affects all of us, and it affects us in terms of the peace and security and happiness that we are expected to benefit from while at rest and at home. So we all have to pay attention. And my colleague Jomo made a very significant point, and I'm very big on this point. It was in the news, I believe, at our recently concluded CARICOM summit in Guyana, and that is about the culture. And if we are embracing as young people, especially young males, but we have to say young females too, a violent culture, and we wake up to it, it's in our earbuds, it's on our phones, it's on our radios, it's being played on our televisions, then it follows that we are going to be violent. And for someone who is a gender rights advocate, I advocate, yes, initially primarily for women and girls, but gender means that it is wider, because I, as a former president of the Grenada Bar Association, I went to do visits to the jail. And I'm telling you that on the last occasion, I was so alarmed to see that the majority of the population in the jail, very few women, but all of the majority were young males. And we have to pay attention, because if your young males are being sucked into the criminal justice system, it's going to be a learned experience from learned behaviors, and they will just keep recycling over and over unless few and far apart they are rehabilitated. We have to pay attention, because who are going to be the mates for the young females if they are in jail? Who is going to drive the economy? We're hearing about women being mainly the ones employed in St. Vincent, and it's getting to that here as well. Who is going to drive the economy? Would it be just the women alone? Who are going to be the fathers of the children who are the future of Grenada? So the time has come for us to all pay attention. We can't just be punitive. Of course, if this is in the purview of the court, as will happen, that is where you have to be punitive. But I am an advocate for early childhood intervention, continuous education, starting at the level of nursery, working with parents in the homes. There has to be a higher incidence of social work, village by village, town by town, parish by parish. And you have to have it, as we've heard, a whole life cycle approach to educating people in terms of preventing violence in our society, especially providing support to our young men so that they will come away from crime, providing gainful employment and activities for them. So a lot more has to be done at the constituency levels. And I would say that our political leaders, our church leaders, our school leaders, they have to lead by example and take these initiatives now.
And I also wish to make this point, and I made the point in the editorial, in as much as, yes, Grenadians do want to hear from their Minister of National Security, politicians, the Minister of National Security is not the be-all and end-all of solving whole-of-society issues. These whole-of-society issues did not start within the context of election cycles. These existed for a while. Systemic issues within policing and so on, all of those issues existed for a while in our society. And perhaps it has been a slow walk and slow creep to get here, but perhaps we are beginning to see those results now. And Jomo, you seem to be very concerned about the condition of young men. Do you defend a lot of young men in court? And what are some of the stories you hear from them in respect of why they do what they do, in respect of the crimes that are committed?
Well, the answers run the spectrum.
Yes.
Rum made me do it. Somebody put me so to. I just thought that I could get away with it. And most times you get responses which say that it ain't me, until you get the statements from the police. And you get the statements, disclosure from the police, and you have a number of people saying, look, I saw Jomo, he was in the store, I saw when he picked up the thing. Sometimes people have cameras at their homes now increasingly. You get the disclosure. It's there. So, but I think young people tend to believe that they're invincible, that they're not going to get caught. Not me, anybody but me. So I think that they are more daring, they are more enterprising, they are more aggressive. And then again, when we add the culture onto that, increasingly, they are thinking that they want to represent, they want to be respected. Some of them want to be feared. And I think that is what is causing the disalignment. That is what is causing many of the breaches that we see in society, and it's resulting in criminal and crime and violence. And that is a bad. I can tell you in St. Vincent, increasingly, people are responding to that kind of fear, and it's not in any particular, true, the occurrences may be in some neighborhoods, but it's spreading more and more. It's spreading across the nation, the length and breadth. It may be concentrated in some, but it's spreading across the nation. And that is creating a level of fear. There has always been concern.
Mm-hmm. But now you're saying it's getting to a level of fear, and you said people are responding. How are they responding? Are they?
Well, some people are. You hear people say, well, people are becoming even more shuttered. People are depending more on barricading themselves in their homes. Many of them are not going out in the same way in which they used to. Many people are talking about crime and violence. So, for example, there was a report from the police earlier this year in which they said that apart from the fact that we had the highest number of homicides in our history, 55, the police made a report that all other crimes had fallen. I mean, people laughed at that. It was dismissed out of hand. Nobody believed it. But I was assured by some police officers whom I speak to regularly and have a good line of contact that was the reality. That may also be explaining another situation where persons feel as though, look, even if I want to report, I am not getting any results. So consequently, there may be a fall off in reporting of certain incidents. Although, like Grenada, I heard my colleagues say that sexual offenses, particularly offenses among women and young girls and children, there's an increase in reports, which I think is a positive thing, because we cannot allow people to prey on that very vulnerable section of society, particularly people who are in positions of trust, who are preying on young girls and children. So the increase in that kind of detection and reporting, which results in criminal charges and many times conviction, I think is a positive thing.
Absolutely. And Mr. Joseph, I'm going to bring you back here because we do want to get to some of our viewer comments in respect of today's live stream of the Bub Report, and I will get to those comments. Bob Marisho, Jomo is saying, nice seeing you, Attorney Jomo Thomas, from our City College, New York days of the 80s. Hang in there, Attorney.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Shireen Thomas is saying, Isaac is saying, no accountability. It's the state of cognition manifesting in attitude and behavior. Yes, that sense of a lack of accountability. I mean, growing up in the Caribbean, it's something that we valued, you know, it's and this sort of get rich quick thing, and that was never part of how we were raised and socialized. At least that's not how I was raised and socialized. I can't speak for anybody else. Let us get to another comment here. Vonnie James, good morning, sir. He's saying, do we need to refer to the Grenada National Sustainable Development Plan 2035 vision to address some of these issues? Of course, the National Sustainable Development Plan, while Grenada has its own curated version, there is a version for each island in the OECS and each developing country context. Any comments on this panel? The Sustainable Development Plan.
Yes, obviously, if we do not address what is happening here, for us here in Grenada, we're hearing what is happening in St. Vincent, and we are seeing a creeping murder rate here as well. Again, mainly among our youth violence, collateral damage related to the drug trade, and so on. And of course, some intimate partner violence that remains somewhat prevalent in terms of our statistics. But based on what we're hearing from St. Vincent, when your neighbor's house is on fire, you have to wet yours. So yes, whatever strategic planning we're doing, we're hearing a lot about economy and growing your economy, and we tend to think of sustainability and good governance in light of having more money in our pockets, addressing cost of living. But if we have a better economy, we have more money in our pockets, but we have to be more shuttered, then that is not sustainable. So I would have to say yes, when we are having our discussions about our 2035 sustainable planning and so on, human resource, our living and wellness, security, I think, has to be a main pillar of looking forward to 2035. If we are not secure, if we are afraid, then if we are facing a lot of societal violence, that will definitely affect our economy because investors will run, our own nationals will leave for more safe locations, whether it's in the Caribbean or beyond, whatever they perceive, as well as we will be having a lot of mental health issues and so on. Our jails will have to be expanded. So let us arrest it now. We cannot wait for 2035 to be upon us as we plan for that time. We want to be happy, peaceful, secure, free of corruption as best as we can. These are all ideals that and pillars that should inform any sustainable plan of a nation.
Then we have another comment here from Jomo's friend there, Mr. Bob Marisho, saying, the rights of the accused seem to be sacrosanct, but I'm not hearing about the rights of the public to be free from accused persons who prey on society. Jomo.
Well, the rights of criminals, it's not that the rights of criminals are sacrosanct, the rights of citizens are sacrosanct.
Yes.
And the fact that I am accused of a crime, I mean, I have represented scores of persons, maybe hundreds of persons over the years, in my 27 years of practicing law, where persons were accused and the state assumed it had an open and shut case, only to watch that case unravel when you get to the actual trial. So it is the constitutional rights, the right to liberty, which is a fundamental right, the right to be able to a right to an attorney, or those are things that are important. So remember, when somebody is preyed on and that person is injured or that person is hurt, or worst case situation, that person is killed, it is not the accused person against Jomo Thomas if Jomo Thomas is injured. It is the state that is taking on that responsibility. And it is the state's responsibility to marshal all the resources necessary to investigate, apprehend, charge, and try, and to bring that person to bring that case to fruition one way or the other. A few years ago, we had the renowned Caribbean criminologist Tony Harriet, here. And Tony Harriet made the very points that the way in which you are going to bring confidence back to the people in society is to ensure that you have early detection, arrest, charge, trial. If you can do that, but in St. Vincent, we had an admission from the commissioner earlier this year. No, it was late last year, that of the 42 homicides that were committed in 2022, there were only 12 arrests. I mean, that's a damning situation. There were only 12. And we're talking here about arrests. We're not talking about, he did not say whether these were arrests that led to charge and people pending trial, because a lot of times people are arrested and they're released after 48 hours here in St. Vincent. I think it's 5 days in Grenada. But so the question for us is not for us to think, because we only see the charge broadly. Criminals seem to be sacrosanct until it's not us, or it's not our family member, or it's not our friend. When it's us or our friend or family member, we want the same kind of rights that we had all along. So I think that we have to, while we are appreciating and understanding the serious difficulties that we are having in terms of crime and violence, we cannot go for vigilante violence, one, and we have to implore the rulers, the people in the power elite, to do the kind of things that are necessary to make sure that criminals are apprehended, charged, and tried speedily. I think if we do that, a lot of confidence would come back.
Absolutely. Mrs. Thomas? Mrs. Joseph? Sorry. I don't know. I'm not sure why I'm saying Mrs. Thomas today. Mrs. Joseph, to that question.
Yes, I actually saw a question that had come up about
Yes,
It's to a bail fee. Is that the one?
yeah, I would be reposting that question there. It says, presumably, is there a book that can be furnished to the court showing that a bailable offense was satisfied?
Well, as my colleague would share with you, again, we have standard bail guidelines that would inform a court as to when bail would be granted, but you presume that bail would be granted because of the rights of freedom of the liberties, a constitutional right in our Caribbean, our Commonwealth English-speaking Caribbean, that you have a right to bail unless there are issues such as the seriousness, the aggregating factors, the risk of flight, and such issues that a magistrate who would be hearing initially at the magistrate's court level this request or application for bail. Now, what I think is also coming through in the questioning is this right of bail trumping the rights of the victims? And for us in a justice system, and as we know, the symbol of the law or the justice system is the balancing of scales. So a magistrate or a judge who has to hear a bail application has to take many factors, not only the aggravating factors, they sometimes very practically may have to take a space factor in our jails, the overcrowding, especially if the offender is a youth offender, a young person. A magistrate will bend over backwards. And even though I am all for punishment, I am also all for trying to divert a young offender who has not had a history prior to presenting, or perhaps a history of, some kind of offense that is often committed by youngsters, such as fighting at a party or a fair, or at the stadium at a show, maybe intoxicated or so on. You try as best as possible, as guided by our juvenile justice programs, to keep young offenders out of becoming contaminated or further exposed to hard line criminals if they are remanded to the prison with the older persons. Sometimes, of course, they are remanded here in Grenada. There's a juvenile offenders facility at the Bacalet. But the problem of putting young people with criminal tendencies together in a location is that you are hardening their criminality. So the court will try, for example, in Grenada, we have our legal aid. We do have a legal aid system, unlike St. Vincent that has been shared with us this morning. You have persons who work tirelessly there with the man-to-man program on anger management. So there are other areas of diversion or interventions which are sometimes tried or attempted. That is why, too, you would find that the magistrates would put offenders on bail. So these are just some of the reasons. Obviously, if they breach their bail conditions, automatically they will have to go to, whether it is if they're young, they will go to the detention center at Bacalet, or a little older but still youths, or whatever age they are, they will go on to remand at Her Majesty's prison. So it is about balancing everything. But of course, when we are seeing an uptick of criminal behaviors in our society, where I live in St. George's, all of a sudden, a few weekends ago, I heard gunshots in my location, startling me out of my sleep well into the night. So these are wake-up calls. So likewise, our judicial officers have to pay attention to what is happening in our society, and also respond with all that they have available in their quiver of prevention in terms of responding to bail applications. Perhaps, as I said earlier, stronger bail conditions, bringing in the parents of especially younger offenders, the families, society leaders, to stand to say, should these people go on to remand pending their trials, or are you prepared to provide support and report to us in a timely manner as to whether they are adapting or trying their best to stay out of criminal activity. There's a lot that can be done. Obviously, a lot more has to be done, and a lot more has to be considered by our judicial officers in terms of granting bail to accused persons.
Jomo, anything else you wish to add to what Mrs. Joseph just articulated here?
No, not really. I unite completely with the point that she made.
Okay, very well. Trevor Bailey, a comment from Trevor Bailey. I'm not too sure if it's the same ACP Trevor Bailey from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but good morning to you, sir. And I believe, again, I can't say this enough, that the people of Grenada are in high praise for the Royal St. Vincent and the Grenadines police force for their quick action in apprehending the 3 fugitives from justice, who we believe will be facing justice soon. So ACP Bailey, if that is you, welcome, sir, to the Bub Report, this time on the other end as a viewer. I hope that you can continue to view our program, sir. But you said very interesting discussion. The region also has to pay close attention with regards to the gun trade to stem these gun-related offenses. We do not have gun factories in the region. And I also believe that those points were also raised at the CARICOM summit that was held in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, in which gun crime was declared as a public health issue in respect of that question. Anything else you wish to add to that comment, lady or gentleman?
Yes, I believe, especially at the level of CARICOM, based on what is happening, yes, we don't have gun factories, but we do have crimes that are parallel or dependent on arming up of the criminals, our drug trade. It tells me, or I would say it suggests to me, that at the CARICOM level, we do have a regional security service, the RSS. We do have partners from the United States as well as the UK and others who are providing support in our territorial waters by agreements to ensure that they curb primarily maybe the drug trade, but if the drug trade is morphing, taking a different direction, or perhaps the demand for the drugs is being stemmed because of the activities where the supply in North America, Europe, or so on is dependent, it could be now that a new commodity is guns. And that is why we're seeing more guns instead of perhaps kilos of cocaine or other such commodities within our region. Or people are using the mollies, the capsules, other forms of hallucinogens in our region. Maybe this is why we're seeing guns are becoming a commodity. Therefore, our leaders, the policymakers at a regional and represented at that regional level by our national ministers of security. So, of course, we will have to hear more, hopefully, from our own Minister of National Security, the Prime Minister here from Grenada, as to what are the policy shifts, the policy tweaks and pivots that will be made regionally and national to address the incidents of growing movement of guns and ammunition within our nations and through and across our CARICOM region. A lot has to be done. We have to balance what might be, and we heard it in our own policing press conference here only this last week, yes, what might seem to be confidential national security issues. These leaders have to get to the level of advocacy which provides, in as transparent a possible a way, confidence to the citizens, all CARICOM citizens and national citizens, as well as letting the criminal elements who are running the guns throughout our nations and regions know that our national governments, our regional movement, and our CARICOM, we are serious about ending, stemming, and arresting gun crime in our nations and in our region. I think there has to be a level of confidence that has to be imparted and is due to the citizens of this region to ensure that we know that we are beginning to feel much safer because our leaders, our policymakers are doing a lot more to curb gun crime.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was such a very important conversation. We are going to take our last break and get back to you for some closing comments. Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Bub Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG 10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.
Don't go there.
You are a technocrat. I mean, you can speak to whether or not it was appropriate or inappropriate for that to occur. Would you have done that as a permanent secretary?
Politicians get the information from wherever source that they can.
That's going to be the extent of your answer.
Yeah.
Don't go there.
There's a lot of noise around the data protection bill that, in my respectful view, is not warranted.
I was one of those making noise, and it's simply because I was concerned about that specific Section 33.
Don't go there.
Are you going to be offering yourself up as political leader of the party?
I see you've called me have a much more than diplomatic passport. I don't mind that.
Don't go there.
What is the relationship like between you and your leader, Dr. Mitchell, your boss, Dr. Mitchell?
I'm not sure how to explain how to answer this question at this time. I prefer not to answer.
Don't go there.
They said that you approached the bank for the loan before the election and that it only materialized after the election. There are also conflicting reports around the quantity of monies that were received. What is the reality here?
People try to extort the truth and to make all kinds of things about it. I just stay quiet. So if you notice, I was really and truly quiet about the whole matter.
Well, except with not with the New Today newspaper. The New Today newspaper reported on this, so I'm not sure you were quiet on this. Go ahead, Honorable. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just trying to answer your question, right?
Don't go there.
I think we just spoke at length about the regularization framework. So
yes, we did. But let us talk, Prime Minister. Let us talk about the workers who are dismissed.
The Bub Report. We go there.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to the final segment of the Bub Report. Again, if you have not been watching this program this week, you missed a lot. But for the viewers who are here, please remember to share this program so that your friends, your followers, your colleagues can get an opportunity to listen to this very important conversation that we had here in relation to the fallout from the tragedy involving Ralph and Kathy, the two sailors whose boat was hijacked in Grenada by 3 escaped prisoners who led a daring escape from the South St. George police station, even though law enforcement in Grenada is making the point that the South St. George police station is very secure. The citizens are still left wondering how these 3 prisoners, credibly accused of various crimes, were in fact able to escape this very secure facility in the south of the island. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us this week. And of course, thank you all again for agreeing to always participate in the program. This program would not be possible without subject matter experts such as yourself. So, Mrs. Joseph, I will go over to you for some closing comments.
I would like to close by saying that this particular incident that we discussed this morning, it raised a new level of awareness, a new opportunity for discussions, an opportunity for greater accountability by our leaders at the political level, the policing level, as well as the need for our societies to be accountable. Our villages, it says it takes a village to raise a child. When we see young people going wrong, I think we still have a duty in smaller societies like ours to call them out, to report. We need more police responsiveness. If we call in to a station, there are gunshots going off around us, we are expecting that our police force will respond to what is happening in that location. it also tells me that as citizens, we ourselves have to be now more responsible for our own security. And we've heard that from your earlier panel, guest on the program. And that strikes a chord, and it should strike a chord with all of us. We have been complacent. We are always saying, oh, Grenada is so safe, we leave our doors open. But I think as citizens, based on symptomatically what we're seeing in terms of an uptick in criminality, we're hearing even from Mr. Bailey about increased guns moving through our region, and we can see that on reports. I think we too now have to be more aware of our environment and be aware of our own security. So these are my takeaways, not only to myself, but to all who are listening this morning.
Mrs. Trotman Joseph, again, thank you so much for agreeing to appear on the Bub Report this week. It's always refreshing to hear your perspectives based on your lived experiences. Comrade Jomo, over to you, sir.
Well, thank you. Look, my brother, there are reports that Denmark, Belgium, and Sweden are closing prisons. I think we need to study that to find out why that is happening. In the Caribbean, recently, in the last 10 years, we built a new prison because the one we had was an old one that was there since, I think, 1871, the old colonial prison. We built a new one. At the close of the last assizes, we had, I think, 399 persons imprisoned. And about 30% of the persons who were imprisoned were persons who were there for murder, manslaughter, and wounding. 30%. Now, clearly, we have a very violent society. And I think that we need to do some serious heavy lifting, mental heavy lifting, to think, how are we going to turn our society around? And I think the way we turn our society around is to pay greater attention to the social fabric, the foundation. What we have seen is that in St. Vincent, for sure, the social guardrails that we had, the churches, the schools, the villages, the elders, all of that has fallen off. And now we have more people. It's as if there's a dog-eat-dog race for the bottom. Everybody's scrambling to get what they can get. And, to go back to Tony Harriet, when he spoke here, he said, the leaders have to lead by example. And the society has to become more equitable. The society has to be more providing, because the point that Harriet made is that when young people look and they see persons who were not as mentally equipped as them, who were not as qualified as they were, advancing rapidly, and some of them becoming quite rich, then that begins to create the kind of frustration that leads to more and more crime. So the issue of, Trevor Bailey raised it, the proliferation of gun violence, gun transshipment. We know the Caribbean is an area of high shipment of drugs. I think it was one of the states, I can't remember which of the states in the United States, sued the gun manufacturers. We have to join that suit as interested parties, because we are suffering the brunt of the proliferation of small arms. And as we saw on July 19th here, where for the first time we had 5 persons being shot at the same time in the same place, that the guns are becoming increasingly sophisticated. So we have to move on all fronts. It has to be an economic assault. It has to be an attempt to bring back the kind of social organizations that we had. When I was growing up as a youth, there were community and sport and cultural organizations in every single village across St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That is no more. Those are broken down. So the most important institution in Vincentian society now, unfortunately so, are the 2 major political parties. Everyone genuflected them. Everyone looked to see what would my leader think or say. And I believe that is a problem that we need to reverse. Those are the kind of alarm bells that I think we need to look at. And if we look at them and we try to come up with answers that are national in character, rather than sectoral, this party or this group or this organization, this religion may benefit, I think that we will be on our way to solving some of the problems. But I believe at the root is to solve the economic and social problems, which tend to alienate such a large section of the population, not only here in St. Vincent, but across the region. Those are my closing comments.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jomo, just before you go, in respect of just the timeline after these three fugitives from justice appear in St. Vincent Magistrates Court tomorrow in Kingstown, if they are deported, what does that timeline look like? Is that deportation immediate? It's an immediate deportation. Okay. Right.
Yeah, it's immediate. So maybe what may well happen is they may be deported and the Coast Guard may bring them over for you.
The Coast Guard. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying that's the way it may be, but in light of the fact that it is known that they may be wanted in another sister state, they're not just going to tell them you could go on a speedboat and leave St. Vincent. They probably would courier them over to St. George's, where the authorities would undoubtedly pick them up, or they are deemed deported, and the Grenadian authorities would take them from here and take them back.
And there is another. Sorry, but this is a very interesting question. I think we really have to take this one. What about the possibility of the family suing the government? Because this is a very unique case in respect of the fact that these gentlemen escaped prison and then they went on to allegedly commit these crimes. Does the family have standing for a lawsuit against the state here?
Did that question
stun you?
We don't have the facts. They have standing in the sense that they are relatives of the deceased. We now assume them to be deceased. But it's one thing to file a lawsuit, but how are you going to have the evidence to prove as well as what makes the government culpable? So we are a way away from that. We have to see how the evidence unfolds. It may be that it unfolds in a way that may give rise to the possible suing by family members, but there's something in law that is called remoteness. How could government have foreseen this? But if it can be proven by evidence that it could have been foreseen, it could have been prevented, and that something else happened, government also can put up a defense to say, well, if it was enabled by an officer, that was not part of the duty of the officer to let a criminal or criminals go, and therefore that officer was acting on a frolic of their own or totally out of what they were supposed to do, sue them. So, this could go on, and unfortunately, any which way, it cannot bring the loved ones of those families back. And for that, we express our deepest sympathy on behalf of all of us here in Grenada.
It's an interesting question. It's an interesting question. I'm sure some legal minds someplace will be saying, hey, here's something I can do. But there's some very interesting cases that are coming out of Trinidad. Last week, I think, there was a case where some human rights attorneys sued the state for a young lady who was accused, who was a victim of rape, sued the state saying that the state had taken too long to try the accused person, and they were awaiting the decision from the judge. So there are all kind of ways in which creative attorneys are doing all kind of things to bring closure to a lot of people, to bring benefits to a lot of people, to bring compensation to a lot of people. So let's all stay tuned and see what's going to happen.
Let's stay tuned. This certainly, and we will be certainly covering it here on the Bub Report. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again. I know it's your lunchtime, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. Furthermore,
thank you for having us.
So thank you again.
Thank you for having me on. Thanks so much, brother.
Absolutely. All right, viewers and listeners, two esteemed attorneys in the Caribbean who work not only within the legal space, but within the political space, the civil society space, and who brought some very valuable contributions to this week's program. Now, As a reminder, we want to ensure that you all, viewers and listeners, can continue to follow the Bub Report and send us a text or voice note via WhatsApp at 240-733-4116 to react to today's program. And very soon we will be putting out a poll, and we want to hear from your audience members as to whether or not we should be adding a call-in segment to the Bub Report. Do you believe the Bub Report should be adding a call-in segment to the program? Please look out for that poll that will be commencing soon to get your take on this matter. Of course, in April, May of this year, the Bub Report will be celebrating its 4th anniversary as well. And of course, without your continued viewership and support, the Bub Report will not be the staple that it has become for many of you on a Sunday morning. So we thank you again, viewers and listeners, for continuing to support this program. It is a voluntary labor of love that I do. It's something that I'm very passionate about. It's something that I teach. I teach journalism and communication as my passion. And so let us assist this production team with the evolution of the Bub Report. So on behalf of my hardworking producer, Rian Charles, the ever-working, hardworking Rian Charles, there's another producer whose name I'm not going to mention on air, but we all work hard to ensure that we are able to bring you a quality program every week. Stay tuned next week for another installment of the Bub Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kellen Bub, wishing everyone a pleasant week. Take care and be safe. Bye-bye.